Come on, join me.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming this morning. My name is Martina McIntosh, and I'm going to be moderating today. And before we start, I just want to share some information about our guest that you may not know. David Miller is the 63rd Mayor of the City of Toronto and the second of the megacity. He became a Metro Councillor in 1994 and was elected in 1997 to the new City of Toronto Council, where he served 2 terms for being elected mayor in 2003. Mayor Miller has an economics degree from Harvard and a law degree from U of T. And prior to entering politics, Mayor Miller was a partner at the Toronto law firm Aird & Bearless, where he specialized in employment and immigration law. I'd like to thank David Miller for taking time to campaign schedule today to come and speak to our second-year journalism reporting class and some extras in the room. And on behalf of all the students, I want to welcome you to Centennial College. And without any further ado, welcome Mr. Miller.
Thank you. I thought I'd say a couple of things first, and then, so to do that I have to stand. I'll take the questions sitting, but first of all I want to thank you not just for having me here today, but for your interest in journalism and studying to try and make it a career. It's incredibly important to a country to have excellent journalists and to a city. And there's so many stories in Toronto that need to be told. And unless we have young people who are really passionate about telling those stories, we won't be the kind of city we should be. So thank you for your choice of studying, and I hope you find it a rewarding career if you do end up pursuing journalism careers. We do have 2 new journalists. Don Wannigan is my Director of Communications, who used to write for Now and The Post. So afterwards, if we have a couple minutes, feel free to ask Don about his experience, and Peter Kuitenborough from The Post, who may have been introduced, who's a current journalist. You can ask him about his experience. I just want to speak for a couple of minutes about the city, but I just want to say a couple of things about my own background, because politics often, to me, is ultimately about your values, and your values come from who you are. And Rudy Giuliani wrote a book about his experience as mayor of New York City. And he talked about a lot of principles he believed in that I don't necessarily share, but I did share one thing, which he said that being elected is about expressing your values, and you should always be true to them. And I think that's very important. So my values come from who I am. I grew up in England. We immigrated to Canada in 1967. In England, I lived with my mom and my grandfather. We came here after my grandfather died. My family's background was what in England they call working class. My uncle who lived in England was a meter reader for the electric company. My mom was a teacher. My granddad worked for the railway. We came to Canada because my mom believed it was a country in which I would have a real chance. And she was certainly right. I've obviously had a real chance to have the privilege of being a partner in a Bay Street law firm, and then a successful political career is something I wouldn't have imagined as a young boy living in a very small village in England. It just would have been impossible to imagine. And I think like many people who come to Canada, I was lucky I came as a boy, but it was an astonishing place for me. I came here on August 8th, 1967, and I remember it because I was 8, so it was 888. And on August 9th, my Uncle Jim, who was my other uncle who lived here, he was in the Royal Navy in England during the war, then in the Canadian Navy, and by 67 had retired and was working for the federal government as a labor arbitrator, took us to Expo 67. Second day I was here on August 9th. Came to meet us in Montreal, where we got off the boat and took us to Expo 67. And that was before most people in this room were born, but it was an astonishing thing. It was a time in Canada that we collectively imagined we could change our country and change the world. And so my first day in Canada, for me, was this astonishing day of what seemed like infinite possibilities. And I've always sort of viewed Canada through that lens. It's a place of opportunity, it's a place of hope, it's a place of excitement and creativity and vibrancy. And those are the qualities that I see in Toronto today. And one of the reasons I ran for mayor 3 years ago was I didn't believe that our city government was leading the city in the right way to maximize the opportunities we had for those, based on those qualities. And for those of you who followed the campaign 3 years ago, I said that I was running to clean the streets and clean the dirty streets and the dirty deals at City Hall. And that was colorful language, but what I meant was that the government at City Hall, which was tarred by a very serious corruption scandal, was not acting in the best interest of the people. And you can see that simply by the fact that the streets weren't being cleaned properly, a basic public service. And my mandate over the past 3 years has been to turn the government around, to open it back up to the people of Toronto, and to restore basic public services. And I'm very proud of what we've done. I'm happy to answer questions about that. But for example, a government that was tarred with the MFP scandal, past 3 years got 50 awards for public sector excellence. And now getting awards for government is kind of a dry thing to talk about in an election campaign, but it is, I think, very important to see the change that's happened. Where there were scandals and corruption, now there's public service excellence. That's the change we've brought. And I thought very seriously about whether I should run for mayor again, and I decided to because I believe there's a tremendous opportunity today to build on that very solid foundation of having restored basic public services and having restored respect and trust to City Hall. And we've got a great city, but we can certainly ensure it succeeds in much better ways. And in my view, that's about ensuring our city is prosperous, livable, and a place of opportunity for everyone. And prosperity is about jobs and employment and about ensuring our economy is strong. Toronto's had the benefit for a long time of being Canada's natural center of business. But in the world today, you can't rely just on being Canada's natural center of business. We have to have a partnership with the business community to ensure Toronto remains successful. I'll give you an example. In the mining industry, we're the #1 place in the world where people come to finance mineral exploration. So if you want to build a mine anywhere in the world, you come to Toronto first. That's why some of these bank towers are there, and the lawyers and the accountants, because of that fact. Our competition isn't Montreal, it's not Vancouver, it's not Calgary, it's London, England. And they are very aggressive. So we need, as a city, to be very smart about how we ensure prosperity in this city and how we ensure that there are jobs and good quality jobs. And we've undertaken a number of strategies to do that. One of them is we've just started building a partnership with the business community. So it's not just the city of Toronto trying to create prosperity in our city, it's the business community recognizing they have a stake as well. And that prosperity is important because one of the places that needs to benefit from it is the city government. About 10 years ago, when Mike Harris was premier, the province gave to the city responsibilities without funding. It was called downloading. And today, in this year's budget, it cost the city over $700 million. And to give you some perspective, a 1% tax hike on residential houses brings in $13 million. $700 million is a huge, huge amount of money. And we need to find, and we live in this paradoxical place where, because of the way municipalities are funded, predominantly through the property tax, when the economy's booming, our expenses go up. You hire more bus drivers, for example, but our revenues don't. The increase in revenues all goes to the federal and provincial government through income and sales tax. So we need to find a way to share some of that prosperity with the city government so we can properly invest in what people depend on for Toronto to succeed. And in the campaign, I've committed to fighting for 1 cent of either the GST or PST, because that's a tax that does grow with economic growth and can help us overcome those problems. And why do we need that money? Well, we need that money to make the city livable. You also need a livable city in order for it to succeed for the people and for the economy. And to me, livability starts with our environment. The federal government has abdicated its role on climate change. I think it's an embarrassment to our country. And it's time for the cities to take the lead, and we can. We're working with 22 cities around the world and the Clinton Foundation to show real leadership on climate change. And cities can do it because we have the people here and we have the ingenuity. For example, we're the only city in North America, I believe, to have green building standards. We just passed council green building standards. So if you build a building in Toronto, they're voluntary now to work the kinks out, but eventually, in not too distant future, they'll be mandatory. You will have to build green buildings. We're working with the provincial government and Hydro to find ways to ensure that small businesses, like along the Danforth, can generate electricity from solar panels. And there's some exciting opportunities there. Our new buses, we've bought hundreds of new buses since I've been mayor. Why? Because buses are the backbone of the TTC. But it's also allowed us to purchase Canada's largest hybrid bus fleet. We have other hybrid vehicles. All of our buses run on biodiesel and much, much more. Tremendous opportunity for your city government to work with the people of Toronto to make sure we succeed in combating climate change and in making the city livable. And livability is about other things as well. It's about our public spaces, our parks, our green spaces, our architecture design. All of that matters. And when I visit another city, I think about experiencing that city through my feet because you walk around. And that's how we should think of Toronto, I think. It's a city, and when we experience it through our feet, there are some places that are great. But we can truly lift the standard of public spaces. And it matters in this city because we are a city of newcomers. More than half of us were not born in Canada. And so it's in the public places where we all become Torontonians. And that's why I put such an emphasis on livability. So prosperity and livability are connected and important. To me, the most important thing, though, is opportunity. And, you know, in Canada, my experience in 1967 when I came here, this was a country of equality of opportunity. And very sadly, it's not so true today. There are neighborhoods in Toronto, 13 of them, that are marked by very high combinations of poverty and lack of services. And the people in those neighborhoods, particularly the young people, don't have the opportunities that they deserve. And I think it's incumbent upon us as a city to make sure there's proper investment in those neighborhoods. We've laid the groundwork through what's called the Mayor's Community Safety Plan. For example, in Melbourne, we've invested in new athletic facilities, a new library, a new jobs program, a program with Centennial College actually to bring education opportunities to young people there. But we need to do much more. And you only have to hear what's happening in Paris to see a very sober reminder. You know, it's not a Canadian value to allow pockets of poverty and lack of opportunity to grow. And you can only bring opportunities to those neighborhoods if you're extremely systematic and determined and say these are our priorities. Every Torontonian deserves a real chance. So those are my goals over the next 4 years. But some of those thoughts are very sobering, but I'm very optimistic about Toronto. And I get particularly optimistic when I come to the colleges and see really committed and articulate young people like the people in this room. I know your questions are going to be extremely hard. I just know that. But I'm looking forward to it because it's a great opportunity for dialogue. So thank you again for the invitation. I look forward to the questions, and I hope my answers measure up. Thanks.
So we have our questions lumped by category. So we're going to start with homelessness in the city, and we'll begin with Ian.
Back when the homelessness was done, a lot of advocates for the homeless said that it was just a PR stunt from the perspective of that homeless people weren't actually going to benefit. Since that time has been done, we've got information to help the homeless and start programs for them.
Well, I have to put it in context. Is that okay? Our plan to work with the street homeless is called From Streets into Homes. And the philosophy behind it was that what we did in the past before I was mayor wasn't adequate because what we did as a city and nonprofits and people was simply make sure people didn't die. So you'd bring them blankets in the winter, food, help them survive, but help them survive on the streets. What we're doing now is sending trained social workers out to people to find out what their needs are, with the idea that instead of helping them to survive on the streets, we help them get off the street into a home. We've had that program for about 1.5 years, and we've housed about 800 people who otherwise would have been living on the streets of Toronto. Are there still street homeless? Yes. But Toronto is a place where a lot of people move for opportunity, and very sadly, for a number of reasons, it's a very expensive place to have housing. Some people, including a lot of youth, end up on the streets. So I'm very pleased with that strategy. The street count is part of that strategy. And the idea was we need to know who's on the street, what their needs are, so we can focus our resources better. And we learned from the street count that we're probably doing things about right, but there is a clear challenge, two clear challenges. We need to much stronger job working with the Aboriginal community, who are overrepresented in terms of their percentage of population in the street population. And secondly, we knew this, but it reconfirmed that there are serious gaps in the mental health system. And it's a real tragedy, and I don't know if any of you have been in rooming houses in Parkdale, but I urge you to go walk through a number of rooming houses in Parkdale. And they're better than they were when I was first elected, because we've had a deliberate strategy of trying to improve the living condition of people. But I bet you will find places you'll be shocked that in the city of Toronto people are living in the conditions they're living. And it's because of deinstitutionalization, which is the right philosophy, but which says we want people to be treated in their community. There aren't the community services, enough of them, and people are sort of abandoned. And that's where we need to do a much better job. Mental health is a provincial responsibility, but we're not waiting for the provincial government to act. We've pulled together all of the stakeholders in the mental health sector in Toronto to try to find a strategy to address the mental health needs of poor people, because there are many homeless people who don't have mental health challenges, but there are many who do, and they need proper, really what they need is what we call supportive housing. So a roof, a friend, like a worker there, and a job. And that's how you stabilize people, and that's, I think, the needs assessment highlighted that deficiency rather clearly.
Thank you. Our second question will be from Darlene.
Hi, Darlene Morales.
Hi.
I have a two-part question. My first question is, what do you think the city can do to try and prevent youth from ending up in the streets? And my second question is, you were talking about earlier how the city is implementing programs for youth in lower class or poor neighborhoods. What's doing, or what can be done to appeal to youth already on the street, to try and get them off the streets?
Well, I think with respect to street-involved youth, you have to do it person by person. And we support with grants a number of organizations that reach out to youth on a person-by-person basis. And it's the same philosophy as streets into homes. You know, you have to recognize that the humanity in people who are on the street, and get in contact with them through someone that they're prepared to befriend, and find out what the needs are and connect them with the right kinds of supports. A lot of youth on the street are often coming from abusive situations, for example, so they need support and counseling. We need to connect employment opportunities with those young people. We do make those connections now. I think finally we need, the federal and provincial governments have a role here too, through their training programs and those kinds of things. So what we are doing is trying to approach people as individuals. Predominantly we do it through supporting agencies that are independent of the city. That seems to be extremely effective. And I think that the gaps, what we need to do better, are connecting people with opportunities and learning opportunities. And there are street-involved youth who are in high school in the city who don't have a place to live. And it's very important to connect them with those kinds of chances.
Continuing with at-risk youth, our next question will be from Sulian.
About the 13 million you're spending in neighborhoods?
Yes.
How would that be distributed? Like in what areas?
Well, the 13 neighborhoods are Malvern, Jamestown, Kingston, Galloway, Flemington Park, and some others. I don't know them all at the tip of my tongue. They're defined by the United Way, the city, the province, and the federal government. We did a study to see where there was the highest combination of poverty and low services. And the money is designed to help support some of the partnerships we've been creating to bring educational and employment opportunities to young people in those neighborhoods, and also to bring recreational opportunities. So for example, if you look at Malvern, because we started early on Malvern, so I think it's one of the more successful examples. Malvern, there's a new track, basketball courts and soccer field that was donated by Nike. And what they did at the Toronto Marathon, they got everybody to donate their old running shoes, and they recycled them and made this track out of it, which I thought was really cool because you had reuse and recycling and rejuvenating a neighborhood. We also rebuilt the library there, and it's spectacular. It's fabulous. It's got computers, so kids, young people really have a chance to connect with the world. We have brought specific job training programs to Malvern, the Malvern Youth Employment Initiative, which trains young people one-on-one who are disconnected, gives them the skills they need in order to get back into the employment world. And we have brought educational opportunities through Centennial College. What I'm hoping to do with the money is use it to support programs like the Malvern Youth Training Initiative, to allow the city to make a little bit of a contribution if we have a private donor like Nike, for example, to make the facilities better, and also to work with the private sector. This is the big gap at the moment. We've got, last summer we brought 1,000 jobs, city jobs, to those 13 neighborhoods. We tried to get 1,000 private sector jobs. We ended up getting about 100. And we need the private sector to be more of a participant, and I think by having some funding there, we'll be able to do that better. So it's a very long-winded way of saying the details aren't all worked out, but that's the general philosophy. It's that if you bring opportunity and training and skills and education and jobs to young people in these neighborhoods, they're going to respond extremely well. And I guess I give one other example, Flemington Park. Do you know about Flemo Radio? Okay, well, Flemo Radio I think is great. This Flemington Park has a real tradition of hip-hop music. There have been several successful musicians come out of there. And the International Order of Foresters head office is there. So we had a partnership between the city, local agencies, the Ontario Science Centre, which is there as well, and foresters, and they donated $50,000 to set up a state-of-the-art radio station run by the youth in Flemington Park, which and the CRTC allows you to have your own radio station if it doesn't broadcast very far. Oh, I guess you guys probably all know that, don't you? Because you're journalism students. But so they have their own radio stations, their voice. They can tell their stories, and they're running it. But they're also learning the skills of media. So it's a very positive experience. And on top of that, Foresters is hiring some of the young people from that neighborhood, giving them internships right in Foresters. So, and I like that example because that speaks to what we're trying to do. And when the city has some more money there, we can make those kind of partnerships happen more often.
Next question, Lisa.
Hi. I'm just wondering, seeing as Malvern has experienced a dramatic drop in crime since the Galloway boys and other gangs have been cleaned up, Gary Ellis mentioned that it has a lower crime rate. I was just wondering, why do you still label it an at-risk neighborhood, and if you feel labeling it this way will have some negative connotations?
I don't like the term at-risk. I think it's a term we should stop using, and I'm doing my best to stop using it. But it's been around so much, it occasionally makes its way out when it's not supposed to. These neighborhoods aren't at-risk neighborhoods. They're neighborhoods that have a very high combination of poverty with low services. There are other poor neighborhoods in the city, but they have much better services. Regent Park, for example, the average income is very low, but there's a community health center and all sorts of other facilities. So to me, this is important because it's about a government prioritizing the people who need it the most, and that is the point of this. It is also true, though, that these neighborhoods tend to be the ones where the gang problems are the most significant. And in Malvern, we've made headway because the police did some very good work to arrest a lot of the gangs. And then with the programs coming in, some of the kids who were starting to get caught up in the gangs, 14, 15, 16, whatever, are seeing there's other opportunities. So we're going at it from both sides. But I agree with you. I think at risk doesn't sound right. And I think what we should really be speaking to are neighborhoods that need investment. And that's what we're trying to do, is bring investments to the neighborhoods that need it.
Kevin.
Hi, yeah. In regards to ex-Chief Fantino, You've stated that every chief performer has done like 5-year terms, and his 5-year term was up, so he was out. But you've also said that he's been reactive as opposed to proactive, and that sounded like you said it in a pejorative way. So I was just wondering why he wasn't good enough to run the chief of police, but they feel he's good enough to commission the OPP right now.
Well, Chief Fantino's contract was up. The previous 4 or 5 or 6 chiefs, I haven't looked it all up, all ended their term at the end of 5 years. At the time, the Police Services Board was very bitter and divided, and they simply could not agree on whether he should get an extension, and if so, how long. I do think the approach under his leadership was focused more on what they call primary response. So it's not an issue me thinking it. Chief Fantino himself, when he came in, said that he wanted to put more resources into primary response. That is sending out the police cars when something happens. That's important, but that's only one part of policing. And you need police on the ground in communities. Chief Blair called it intelligence-led policing. The police who know the communities, know the people in the communities, and who are able to prevent crimes from happening. That is very, very important. That's part of the police duty. You know, it's to serve and protect. So you need both. Protection is not just about arresting people. It's about preventing the crimes from happening in the first place. I'm not saying any of that pejoratively. That was his, you know, when he became chief, he changed from community policing, and he was critical of it. He said we don't need police flipping hamburgers, to putting more investment in primary response. I think policing is much more effective when you put the investment in prevention. And you know, at the moment, we're seeing a lot of results, and that's been Chief Blair's strategy. But to be clear, the police board who appoints the chief is at arm's length from City Hall. I am on it now. I was not on it when Mr. Fantino's contract was up for renewal.
Well, would you have extended his contract if you had been on it?
I would have tried to find the board, get the board to pull together and reach a consensus. But if you go back and look at the press at the time, it was very bitter, and that wasn't possible. I'm not sure if I'd been there instead of Councillor McConnell, who was my appointee, if it would have been any different. It was really, people were very, very angry on both sides, and they weren't able to work together. Good news is the board now is very functional, and the leadership of Alec Mukherjee is terrific, and they've reached a consensus, and they're working well.
Okay, our next topic is the always hot one, TTC. And we're going to start with Alicia.
You mean Julian Fantino's not a hot topic in the TTC?
My question is basically, everybody knows about the proposed subway expansion up into Vaughan region, but there's also a lot of talks about bus rapid transit and light rapid transit into other various areas of Toronto that could probably be more beneficial than putting the money towards that. I just want to know what your thoughts on that were.
Well, I think my thought is Toronto is a great transit system for a city of 1.5 million, but we're not. We're a city of 2.6. And if, as you all know, if you live within, let's say, one bus route from the subway or a streetcar, the system's pretty good. But there are a lot of parts of this city where you have to take 2 or 3 buses to get anywhere. So I believe what we should do is bring rapid transit to those neighborhoods. And we're talking about very large parts of Scarborough and Etobicoke in particular, where people just simply don't have access, easy access to rapid transit. And the only affordable way to do that in any realistic time frame is through bus rapid transit, buses running in their own roads, like in Ottawa, if anybody's seen it in Ottawa. Building your own road for a bus, and I know it works. First of all, because I lived in Ottawa, but secondly, you know, you see, if you go to Ottawa in January, when it's bitterly cold, you'll see tons of people standing at the bus stop, because they know when the bus is on its own road, it's just as fast as getting a car. It's like an above-ground subway, and they also know the service will be reliable. Because when buses or streetcars operate in mixed traffic, one car can hold up, you know, a streetcar with 80 people on it when it's turning left, and you end up with service that's bunched up. So in Toronto, on busy routes, you'll stand there at a bus stop, 3 buses will come along, and then one won't for 15 minutes. In Ottawa, on the bus roads, a bus comes every 5 minutes, and people know it. That's why they take it. You get the reliability of a subway. That's why we're building St. Clair. It's the same thing. All we're doing on St. Clair is adding a curb, essentially. That's all. The streetcar would have had to been dug up anyway. The rails were worn out, so we decided to do it at the same time. And it's to do the same things, to provide reliable service that is also rapid, but the reliability is the key. And St. Clair costs about, St. Clair provides the capacity about equal to half the capacity of a subway line, which is all you need. You don't need a subway out there. It's enough capacity, and it costs 1/10 the amount of a subway. In fact, probably less than that, but it's at most 1/10. And that's why I favor this kind of plan, because we can actually, in real time, realistic time horizons, we can make a real difference in people's lives. One of the places that we'll look at is the Finch Hydro Corridor, for example. We're building a busway in part of it now over near York University. There may be some opportunities to use other parts of it to create some rapid transit, particularly in northeast Scarborough.
Okay, our next question is from Relena, and if you're in the back, could you please stand up?
I kind of broke my knee on the weekend. I can't really stand up. Okay.
I can see you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Marlena. There's been a lot of counterfeit metro passes and bus tickets and tokens and things like that. And I just wanted to know, like, what the city does to, like, prevent those kind of things from happening, so that the public does not get their hands on those kind of things.
We have a regular program of fraud detection. It's actually, the TTC compared to most major transit properties is pretty good. The one problem we have was with foreign conies that, excuse me, are quite similar to the tokens. And if, when it's busy, the collectors, it's very difficult for them to notice. They have caught, as a result of our systematic fraud prevention efforts, they did make a significant arrest of people counterfeiting tickets. So they're making some changes to the fare media, and on an ongoing basis, they're always reviewing this and then making changes to try and get ahead of the counterfeiters. So it's a constant battle, and we don't always win, but we're doing a pretty good job. And one of the reasons, for example, we made Metro passes transferable. I liked it because it created value for people. A Metro pass is expensive, but when it's transferable, you can share it with someone in your family. If you're at school during the day and your sister's at school at night, for example, it gives you more value. But it's also helpful, to avoid some of the problems that people, when they're getting IDs, they were trying to forge IDs and things. Makes it much simpler, and it makes it's easier to keep up with the fraud issues when you have a simpler fare medium like that.
And
Can I just ask one more question? Really quick. How does one person go about, like, creating a new bus route in, like, a developing area? Because sometimes, like, because it's a new developing area, there's, like, not a lot of bus service. So just wanted to know, like.
You get a hold of the TTC's route planning section. They also have a public meeting. It's in October every year. I'm really sorry, I can't remember. One point in the year, they have a big public meeting where they talk about proposals. They do evaluate it themselves. The other thing to do, or the two things to do, are get a hold of the local councillor in that area and get a hold of the chair of the Toronto Transit Commission. At the moment is Howard Moscow from North York.
And last but not least on PTC is
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Hannah, and I just wanted to know, you said that as ever since you became mayor, you brought in around 100 new buses. And
700.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know, how do you think that will improve the waiting time for people who do wait for buses? Say, for example, one comes and you have to wait for around 15 minutes during the waiting time.
It's improved. We've put new service on, which is not the same as new buses, in some of the underserviced neighborhoods. And 100 of the new buses will be extra. So that will help us provide better service. That's important. Most of the new buses, though, are simply replacing what we had, because when I was elected mayor, we had a bus deficit. And that's not a great interesting thing to talk about, but it's true. Our buses were 24 years old. Does anybody in here have a 24-year-old car? How many people are over 24? Okay, a lot of people, but a good chunk of people in this room were not as old as our buses. That's how old they were. And to give some perspective on that, New York City, which is comparable to us, right? They have a busy transit system. They scrapped them after 12 years. Ours were twice as old. We had an assembly line where we were literally rebuilding buses, basically from scratch. So we were at risk, when I was first elected, of the backbone of the TTC is the bus, of having significant cuts to TTC service. So most of our effort's been to replace them, but there are 100 new ones and they will provide better service and underserviced routes. The first goal being to cut the schedule so you don't have to wait as long.
And we actually have two more questions on TTC. Sarah?
Hi, Ms. Nolan.
Hello?
Your report is saying the gas tax program is important because it provides the TTC with long-term stable funding. Do you believe high-efficiency hybrid subway cars would be a good investment of the gas tax?
Yes.
No.
Well, the new subway cars that we're ordering from Bombardier in Thunder Bay, which I think meet the description you just said, are going to allow us, in combination with some new signaling technology, to increase the capacity on the Young University Spadina line by 40%. And this is really important because, first of all, in terms of the environment, people getting on subways is very efficient when they're busy. Secondly, the Young line is basically at capacity right now. We can't run any more trains with the current technology. It's not safe. So the new cars will significantly increase the capacity. They'll give people a real alternative. And we know from all of our work that when you give people a real alternative to ride the subway, they'll take it. So you've got a whole range of great environmental benefits as well as transportation ones, because York Region is building a busway down to Finch. So the commuters coming from the 905 will actually be able to encourage more of them to take transit, which will help get cars off the road and be better for the environment and getting around the city.
And our actual last question on TTC is from Paula.
Hi.
Hi.
I actually live on St. Clair Avenue West,
Yes.
close to Caledonia, and last year I interviewed Mitch Stambler and Cesar Palacio on the topic, and a few shop owners, and they were all against it. But then Mitch Stambler was mostly for it, and I wanted to know how you think shop owners would benefit from the project once it's complete.
Well, I think shop owners will benefit the same way, and I live not too far from you, by the way, as you know. Shop owners will benefit the same way they did on Spadina. Right? We had the same fight on Spadina, and business values have gone up since the streetcar right-of-way went in. Ridership went up 30% between the streetcar and buses. Why? Well, in my view, it's because it became much more reliable. You know, there'll be a streetcar coming every few minutes instead of standing there and waiting for 3 of them to come, which is the biggest complaint you get as a TTC commissioner on the King car, for example. They do short turns all the time because they're stuck in traffic, and it's the only way to get the schedule back on. So that reliability of service is really important. What it does for the small business, it makes it a much more attractive place for businesses to locate, because people are going to want to go there. Plus, as part of the investment, we're investing a significant amount of money in rebuilding the street and planting trees and rebuilding the sidewalks, beautifying it. So there are a number of parts of St. Clair where the businesses are actually really struggling, as it is today. And this project, I believe, will rejuvenate their opportunity to succeed. The challenge for them is the construction. And I've spoken to these business people a lot, and they basically raise 2 objections. They say, our people come in cars. So they're worried about that. We're going to provide plans to provide at least the same amount of parking. So that one should be fine. And the second one is they're worried about the construction. The construction was going to happen anyway because the rails had to be replaced. I think 2 years from now, when you go speak to the businesses, maybe not in Caledonia because it won't be finished there, but further east where it's done, they'll be saying, this is great. People are coming out. Our business strips revived. That's certainly what happened on Spadina. In fact, in Spadina, the complaint is it's packed all the time. You can't even walk up and down the sidewalk. It's so busy.
I'm sorry, the project would be around 65 million, it was?
It's ballpark numbers. It's 30 million to replace the rails. That would have been spent anyway. It's about 35 million to build the dedicated right-of-way instead of just replacing the rails. And then there's about another 10 million or so into street improvements and another 10 or 15 million to burying the hydro wires, which are being done because it's convenient to do it at the same time.
Okay. And our next topic is the promotion of the City of Toronto. And we'll start with Adam.
Explain how a revitalized waterfront will aid in gaining a successful Olympic bid in Toronto.
Well, I don't know if the waterfront will aid on the Olympics or not, but it will aid in putting our city on the map in the world. And if you think, it's an amazing opportunity we have here, and we know it from Toronto. We don't just have to look at other cities. You can look at other cities like Sydney, Australia, or Barcelona, or I guess even London, England. It's on a river. But great cities of the world that are on water embrace their waterfront. Toronto turned its back on the waterfront. You know, we said that's the place where the railway is going to be at the port, and you know, it's industrial and grimy, and just abandoned it. And now we're re-embracing it. And if you see what we've done, you know, in the Ashbridges Bay area, it's packed all the time. In Sunnyside and Etobicoke, it's packed all the time because people have access to the water's edge. We've just built a new park in Port Union in Scarborough. Has anybody been out to see that, Port Union Linear Park? It's great, eh? It's just we created a place of just railway tracks before, and now there's a park and you can go and hang, and it's great. So what the downtown part of the waterfront, which is what I assume you're asking about, what it can do for us is, first of all, we can recapture the water's edge for the people of Toronto, and that creates a vibrancy and a sense of excitement for Torontonians and visitors. Secondly, there's the opportunity to create a real center for employment. You know, what are modern kinds of jobs? Modern kinds of jobs are thinking jobs, they're green jobs, they're creative jobs, like the media, like telecommunications, like information communications technology, like the film industry. The waterfront will be a hub of those kind of jobs. And it's starting already with the film industry. We're building the world's largest soundstage down there, at least a private partner is. Knock on wood, because the deal is not quite signed, but let's assuming it gets signed. And so those kind of jobs are going to come. And you know, finally, there'll be great neighborhoods. So what the downtown park could be is really our signature to the world. And it's a huge project. It's the size of 7 Canary Wharfs. So it's taking time to get it right. But if we capture the water's edge for the people of Toronto, build the right kind of parks, renaturalize the mouth of the Don, and have these green thinking kind of jobs there, you've all of a sudden got an incredible statement about what Toronto is. So that will be our statement to the world, whether it's about getting the Olympics or people coming here and doing business or just visiting or just knowing us. And that's why the waterfront matters so much, because we've got to get it right. We only have one chance. We already messed up 20, 30 years ago the side west of Yonge Street, the side east of Yonge Street. We've got to get it right.
And a second question will be Matt.
Hi. The plans that are being made for the FIFA Under-20 League that's taking place next year, is the natural habitat and environment at Cherry Beach going to be threatened to build soccer fields in that specific area for that event?
No. There will be some soccer fields being built in the vicinity of Cherry Beach. We call them the interim sports fields. They're not specifically for the event, although they may be used for practice and things. They are to provide more access to parks. And the way it will be done won't be risking the natural environment around there. In fact, that area is all slated to be park in the with one small exception. There's going to be some jobs created, knock on wood again, at the corner of Cherry Beach and Unwin. But everywhere else is all slated to be park in the plan.
Is it already park though?
It's a wild area. Some of them remain wild, some of it will be a bit more manicured, and then it's going to go along into Leslie Street Spit, and there'll be a big new federally funded park along there. It's going to be called Lake Ontario Park. And real attention is being paid to the natural heritage and the wild quality of some of it. There will be a couple of soccer fields built there, yes, but they're intended not just for this, they're intended to be there for Torontonians. That's the real purpose of building them. If they're used for the under 20s, it'll just be because they're there.
Okay, and our last question on this topic is from the board.
Hey. You said in previous interviews concerning the NFL coming to Toronto that taxpayers will not pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a new stadium. If Toronto were to be awarded an NFL team, hopefully in the not too distant future, how do you feel the funds should be acquired to, build an NFL stadium or renovate the Rogers Centre, and the potential revenue and tourism that the franchise would bring to Toronto?
If I've never been persuaded that getting an NFL team is really going to change Toronto's tourism, particularly. The Leafs and the Jays have had some very preliminary discussions about putting a bid in. If they buy a team, that's fine, it's up to them, but it's their cost to do the stadium. It's not a public facility. We already paid $600 million for the Skydome once, so paying for it again, I think people would rebel. So my perspective on this is, if they want to bring a team here, that's fine, but it's up to them. I mean, the NFL is a huge moneymaker, and I don't think we should be subsidizing the richest business people in this city in that way. There's another issue too, which is the CFL.
Yeah.
That's a great Canadian institution. It's a really important one in this country, and the health and success of the Toronto Argonauts actually matters in a real definable way to the success of Canada. And if an NFL team is going to come here, it's got to be done in a way that doesn't cause the CFL to crumble. It's too important. We don't always see that here. If you spend any time in a Western city, you realize it immediately. And Toronto's image in Canada isn't always consistent with our reality, and it would be very bad for us within Canada if we cause the CFL to crumble.
But couldn't the NFL just use it as like a farm system like it kind of does right now, and still have like a team in Toronto?
How many people go to the Marlies?
Not sure.
So.
I'm sure
the problem is Toronto's a big league city, right? I go to the Marlies actually because it's in my neighborhood, but it's about half sold. The Leafs is packed all the time, and there's a market for the Marlies, mostly kids. But I think it's an analogy. There's probably an answer, but it's something that has to be thought through first, because the CFL is a great institution. The first Grey Cup was in Toronto. Rosedale Park, I think, between UT and Parkdale or something like that. We can't allow ourselves within Canada to be seen to be undermining it. There may well be answers, but I think it's an important concern.
Thanks.
Okay, and our final group, I'm really not sure what to call your topic, so.
It's not the NFL.
It's not the NFL. It's a little mix of everything. So first will be Baz.
Hi. My question to you is that how do you currently feel about safe drug injection sites, and why?
I'm not sure that they're the solution we need in Toronto because of the nature of our drug problem here. They're more effective with things like heroin, but I do think they should be reviewed. And why? Because you have to approach drug use as a health issue, not just a law enforcement issue. And we've taken the 4 pillars approach, which other countries use. And in Frankfurt, they had enormous success. They had a huge drug problem downtown. Some of their parks were taken over by people who were so addicted they were just trying to find money anywhere they could. It became very unsafe. And they introduced a safe injection site and a safe crack site, and it helped the addicts enormously, helped them stabilize their lives and start to turn around their lives, and it helped enormously the community in which they're located. It turned it around from being one that was people felt very unsafe and unwelcome, and there was a lot of street-level crime, to one that's actually extraordinarily beautiful. This particular park is astonishing. So I think you have to approach this as part of a philosophy that says drug use Of course, there's law enforcement issues with respect to it, but you got to approach it from a public health perspective. And safe use sites are part of something that should be considered where appropriate if they work to combat the problem you're fighting with.
And our second question will be from Sean.
I'd just like to know your opinion on red light districts in other cities like Vancouver or Montreal. And do you think Toronto might fall in the same direction of those cities?
I'm not a fan of red light districts. I think prostitution really victimizes sex trade workers. And I think when you have a red light district, you sort of institutionalize their victimization. I think we need to, help sex trade workers get out of their profession. And I think a red light district sort of keeps them in it. Plus, I have no idea where you'd put it in Toronto either, from a practical point of view.
Our next question will be from Blaine.
There are massage parlors all over Toronto, and kind of like an easy access or hidden access to prostitution. I was wondering what should be done about that.
Well, it's a constant battle. There's there's regulations about what you can do in your property, and I think it comes to our attention when places get really busy and disrupt the neighborhood. And the police enforce the laws where they can, but it's an ongoing thing. So we have all sorts of bylaws, but there's some human behavior that's been going on for thousands of years that is pretty hard to change. So when a place like that creates a real problem in a neighborhood, the bylaw enforcement and the police deal with it. When it's not creating a problem, they have other priorities.
Okay, our next question will be from Zishan, and then we're going to open the floor for 15 minutes. So I guess we'll have 10 minutes. We'll have you raise your hand system, and I'll point to you, and hopefully we can get everybody in.
Oh yeah, hi. I just want to ask, what are the future plans to keep the streets of Toronto clean for prostitution in the future? Like, what are the plans? Like, what are your plans?
I'm really surprised I got 3 questions about prostitution from this. Other than enforcing the laws, I have no other plans. The laws are enforced by the police.
Okay, so that's it from our set questions, and we'll open the floor. I'm going to ask people to ask questions first, and then if we have time for a second.
You were saying about the new soundstage being built in East Portland?
Yeah.
But what about the owner of the land
Phillips
selling a large portion of it to a developer who has a record for building Walmarts? Do you think the residents of the ward, myself included, would like that to be built?
You mean the fact that he sold his other land?
Yes.
Well, we don't have control over what he does with his other land, right? That's not within our power. The film studio that's being built in the Portlands is extremely important for Toronto because we don't have a soundstage that's large enough to take certain kinds of movies. So Superman, for example, just went to Australia, and it normally would have come to Toronto. So we're losing real jobs because of the lack of that. With respect to the Toronto Film Studios, we fought very hard at the city, including going to the Ontario Municipal Board, to try to prevent that land being redeveloped to a use that was not compatible with the neighborhood. I think the Toronto Film Studio use there is really important. We were hoping, in fact we're still hoping, I don't see why we should give up, to keep that kind of use rather than to bring in a big box retail. The unfortunate practical problem is big box retail, I believe, is legal under the same kind of zoning. That's a practical problem for us. But we've worked very, very hard, including our Economic Development Department and our Film Commissioner, to try to keep the Toronto Film Studios as a film studio. Because that's important in that part of the neighborhood. There's a center of excellence there, and we want to keep it. Hi.
Since you want strong, safe neighborhoods throughout the city, what improvements do you think East York needs?
Well, East York has a great sense of community, and it's a community that people can learn from that perspective, because there's a passion for East York. I think one of the things I've tried to do is keep services here at the Civic Center so people have a place to go. I think East York needs employment within East York so people can live and work at a reasonable distance. I think there are parts of East York that our Clean and Beautiful program would benefit to rejuvenate some public spaces. But that community sense is a really strong one here, and it's something that people are justly proud of. And I think that will enable what my other commitment, monetary commitment in the campaign, is to invest in our Clean and Beautiful program, $100,000 a year per ward, more or less. And that's designed to build partnerships with local businesses and people to rejuvenate public spaces. I think there's some places in East York that benefit from that. But I think the jobs are critical. There's some of the north-south small business strips that are struggling. And it's very important to the community that they succeed. And I'd see that as something that's really important for the neighborhood.
Question? Yeah.
I would just like to know, do you have any specific plans due to this election about what you're going to do about the homelessness problem and the increasing housing problem that's happening in Toronto here? I mean, it's getting to the point where you're starting to see panhandlers that move more eastward into the suburbs. That used to be just mainly kept to the west. Is there any plans that, because I'm seeing $100 million for this or $1 million for that, is there anything you have specifically laid down that's going to actually help the problem?
Yeah. We've laid the groundwork over the past 3 years. First of all, we've changed the strategy. So you don't help people survive on the streets, you help them get off. So 800 people have been housed over the past 18 months, more or less 800, which is a huge achievement. We signed an agreement. There are many reasons for street homeless and panhandling in Toronto. One of the many reasons is that the provincial and federal government stopped funding the creation of affordable housing. Affordable housing matters for people beyond the street homeless and beyond panhandlers. It matters for families, but that ended in about '93. So we've brought them back into the business, and we're starting to build housing. So we built 900 units this year. We're going to build 1,000 more each of the next 4 years. Place there's a big gap is what we call supportive housing, so people with mental health issues. Getting them a place where they can live and get some support and proper treatment, that's a huge gap. And there's a disproportionate number of people on the street who suffer from mental illness.
Do you feel that projects such as that is more important than waterfront revitalization, getting an NFL team for Toronto? People on the street don't think that's...
I think it's way more important than getting an NFL team, yes.
Yeah,
the waterfront's important because it's going to create jobs, and we need the jobs to, we also need the jobs, right? That's critical. Building the waterfront alone will create thousands of jobs, and when the industries that are going to come down there come, or the green businesses, I should say, they will create thousands of jobs as well. Thousands. That's why it matters. But, I think this issue of opportunity, which is what you're talking about, is true for street people as well. We've got to make sure that we make it our very highest priority to reach out to those who don't have them. And so I agree with you. Yes, it's extremely high priority.
Next, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I think I have one of those stories, Toronto stories you talked about. In summer, the city organized the street need assessment.
Yes.
And I couldn't participate in it because of my disability. And I love the city. And I felt very excluded from the event. So my question is, what are your plans? Like if you get elected, what are your plans to improve accessibility in the city and in the events, especially organized by the city?
Well, I'm quite surprised and disappointed that you couldn't participate. That's not how it's supposed to run at all. So.
Yeah, I tried to communicate with you by letter too, and I got a response from, I think, your secretary or something.
Okay, I haven't seen the letter, but I don't understand that, because the whole point of the street needs assessment was to engage people in working with the homeless. That's the whole point of it. Accessibility is a very high priority of mine. It always has been, ever since I've been elected. When I was first elected 12 years ago, they wanted to cut the elevator program out of the subways, for example. And at the time, we had one elevator, so you couldn't go anywhere. And Howard Moscow led the fight to make sure that we put elevators in the subway. And our whole vision of the TTC is making it all accessible. That's why the new buses matter, because they're all low floor. They're all accessible buses. And they are going to run a network of accessible buses to the accessible subway stops. So people don't have to take Wheel-Trans, so that you can just be routine. And that's my vision of how the whole city should be. There should be no barriers for people. You should be able to get around the whole city and participate fully in city life the way anybody else can. And the city should be a leader on that.
Yeah, but I also think the problem was on that particular day, it was the incompetence of the organizers, maybe the field officers who were there, because I really felt excluded, and I don't want that happen to someone else in the similar situation. And as you said, nowadays, like most of the routes are accessible, and I felt very surprised that they couldn't send me to the field, saying like the excuse was that I have a mobility device. So.
Well, I'm really shocked by that. It's not how it's supposed to work. So, I mean, it goes against every single thing the city stands for and I stand for. I mean, we invited people to the city in what's called our Access and Equity Roundtable. So people who are facing barriers, whether it's racism, discrimination, ageism, gender stereotyping, stereotyping on sexual orientation, or disability issues, we invited them all so we can make change and make the city the kind of place where everybody feels they have a rightful place. That's the great strength of Toronto. So it's not how it's supposed to happen. I don't.
So
I mean,
are you?
it was the first year of the streets needs assessment, so maybe some people weren't trained properly.
There's all kinds of crime going on in those types of places. What is being done to stop those landlords from just basically getting away with murder?
You know, it's an important point. I'm glad you raised it, because there are, people often stereotype government housing as a place where there's a lot of problems. There are private buildings in the city where there are lots of problems. There's not just in the Black Creek neighborhood. You're talking about buildings on Trethewey? Yeah. So what we're doing in those particular buildings, there's a pretty systematic police effort, and also we have the power to enforce building bylaws and property standards, and we work with the police when there's a building that gets into that kind of state. The property standards people and the bylaw officers and the police all work together on a systematic operation. But I think maybe we need to be more aggressive with the landlords, because the landlords have a role here. The owner has some responsibility, I think. Well, in fact, I know they have responsibility. The tenants legally, and I'm almost recovered from being a lawyer, but I still am one, have the right to what's called quiet enjoyment, which means the landlord has an obligation to make sure their premises are safe and clean. And I think we could do more creatively to push the landlords. There's very good landlords in this city, but there are some that aren't so good. And I guess on that, we do have a fund called the Tenant Defense Fund. And that may be a creative way to work with tenants to help them put some pressure on the landlord through the appropriate legal channels. So you don't just get the enforcement aspect, you empower the people who live there to be able to take back their homes.
And our last question will be from the Blue Jacket.
Hi, I was wondering, the entire thing you're talking about, the priority or whatever, right? So my main factor was basically asking you if the actual, do you have a sheet that tells you what priority you have to go into? Do you spend a lot of time deciding oh yeah, homelessness is a big issue for us, so we have to put more time to that? Do you have that? You kind of have an actual sheet that tells you exactly how much priority provide percentages and how much money you should put into it actually? Let's say for homelessness, do you really want to eliminate that? Do you put a couple million into that or whatever, and that's 5% or whatever, right? So my main question is basically that do you have an actual form that has a lot of priority on it? Like, does it tell you what the actual priority is? Like, and then, like, do you find that the useful investment?
No. It's not. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
For a complicated reason, and I don't want to get too boring, but a lot of what the city does, we're legally obliged to do.
Yeah.
So we have to deliver social services. The province passed a law, so we had to do it.
Yeah.
That we can't take that money and use it for homeless. Right?
Yeah.
We have to deliver policing, obviously. We can't take that money and use it for homeless. So it's actually a very complicated equation.
Yeah.
The priorities are about my own leadership at council and my own time and pushing the civil service. The actual, because of the nature of city government as opposed to provincial or federal, we're very constrained in the funding choices we can make, because so much of what we do we're legislated to do. So we can't, not that I would, but we can't stop paying people welfare and saying we're going to give you housing money. We just can't do that. We're not allowed to make that choice. So, but your question's an excellent one, because it's really about how do you get your agenda through and how do you make the priorities really happen. And what my style has been is if something's a priority, it's a priority in my schedule. So to get the street into homes strategy, which is revolutionary. People come from all over the place to see what we do to help homeless people off the street. I met every week at the beginning, then every 2 weeks, every month with the housing people, the civil servants. And we required them to meet in my office and show us the development of the strategy. And I would push in certain ways if I didn't think they were going right. And then we took that to council. So that's the way I make a priority happen. I make it a priority within my time. And I've only got so much time. So the same thing with community safety. It was more developed by my office than by the civil service, but we made it a priority. The moment I was elected, I said we need a community safety strategy that reaches out to neighborhoods in need. And by the next March, we developed it and got it through council unanimously. So the real answer to your question is not in quite the explicit way you talk about, but yes, we do, within my office, we do prioritize. There are certain issues that are strategic. Working with other governments, for example, is a very high priority. That's always on my agenda. And we use my time strategically on those issues so that we can have the most impact.
Okay, thank you very much.
Does that answer?
Yeah.
And if you can develop the sheet, why don't you just do it for me?
I'd like to thank you again once again for coming. I know we're pressed for time, so thank you.
Thanks. Can I just add something? What I thought beforehand was right. Your questions are tough, asked fairly, but very knowledgeable. And I know you'll all do very well in your program, so I wish you every success, including the paparazzi. Yes, sir.